Today, we are having Dr. Stephanie Estima. She talks about the better body as being the geeky goddess guide to intuitive eating, balanced hormones, and transformative sex. A chiropractor by background, she is an expert in functional neurology, and she brings us really compelling, compassionate intersection of health and physiology with an application to the world of entrepreneurship, high achievement, and frankly, those women who are ready to set the world ablaze. My guest today is someone truly incredible in the health and functional medicine world. Dr. Anna Cabeca is a triple board certified obstetrician and gynecologist, and she is just an all-round awesome woman. On the podcast today, she's going to share with us her own personal journey and story that really shifted for her the mindset and acknowledgement that lifestyle has to play, not only in terms of our health, but actually healing our bodies at a very deep level. We're going to get into the nuances of how we actually enable women to breeze through perimenopause, menopause, so that we can truly harness this incredibly powerful phase of life. This is Impact, the podcast where we explore entrepreneurship, mindset, and health to provide you with the ingredients for an unregrettable version of your life story. Dr. Anna Cabeca, welcome to the Anthropology Podcast. Can you give us some background in terms of who you are and how we got to where we are today, where really you are a leading expert in the world at helping women transition through the various hormonal phases of their life?
Yeah, well, just a quick note is that I got here because my own traumatic story, right? It's our mess becomes our message type of situation in so many ways. To be serious about it, Megan, it's been a journey, a life's journey, loving, helping, and supporting women and women's health. And from, watching my mom suffer with cardiovascular disease when she was 52 and I was 16, and thinking there is just recommendations that are being made for her that are based on studies made for men. So at an early age, I became really passionate about solving women's health issues and standing up for women in this arena. And that led me naturally to be a gynecologist and obstetrician, a woman's health physician through the lifetime, right? So it's such a blessing. I mean, from teenage girls through, geriatrics, through, our entire lifespan, I was able to care for generations of women. And as an expert, Emory University trained, right? One of the best institutions in our nation for training in gynecology and obstetrics. I started my own practice, Southeast Georgia, and post-traumatic event led me into early menopause at age 39. And so this is where I was, a hormone expert. I'd been studying bioidentical hormones at that time for nearly a decade. And I had nothing in my doctor's bag to help me. I was told I was in early menopause and with premature ovarian failure or premature ovarian insufficiency. I was told I would never be able to have another child again. And this was devastation upon devastation because part of our story is that we lost our son in a traumatic accident and in 2006, and he was only 18 months old, and I was still breastfeeding him. And that threw us and certainly my body, mind, soul, and spirit into trauma, grief, and as you can imagine. And so that also, one thing that just struck me was that the amazing, as I can go back and intellectualize now, but the amazing physical changes that were occurring too, from breastfeeding one moment to never having another drop of breast milk. And for any woman listening who's breastfed, you know that if you miss a feeding for 10 minutes, your breasts are engorged. And so those changes, just left me wondering and awed how physiology can change so quickly. But when you're given a diagnosis of menopause or ovarian failure, infertility, you don't think there's a way to solve it, right? This is your diagnosis. That's it. It's like a sentence, a death sentence for me at that time and for my family. So I went on a healing journey. I actually turned my medical practice over to a physician colleague, and we traveled around the world for a year. And just serendipitously, honestly, meeting, healers from all different specialties, from Native American shaman to an Andean philosopher to some of the world's top scientists in New Zealand, Israel, and Europe. And so I met and I learned, and lo and behold, reversed my menopause, reversed my infertility, and at age 41 delivered a healthy baby girl. And so that, the child I was told I would never be able to have. So that just opened my mind and my medical practice to a world of opportunity. And where there weren't solutions for me, I created solutions for others. It started with my product, Mighty Maca Plus, which is a combination of superfoods, including maca, that I believe really helped me and now helps so many others, right? To balance adrenals, to help with the stress factor. But what I learned, Meghan, is that even though I could physically heal from this, at least I thought I physically had healed from the trauma, reversed the early menopause, the PTSD was still under the surface. And what I now know is that women who have had trauma, adverse childhood experiences, either everyday stress or post-traumatic stress, during this period of the perimenopause are vulnerable for additional symptoms, neurologic symptoms, endocrine symptoms, so hormonal balance, mood issues. And this PTSD for me was just under the surface all the time, which led me to burnout, essentially. And even though I thought I had hormonally, I had all the pieces of the puzzle together. So this is where I say it takes more than hormones to fix our hormones, right? It absolutely takes more than hormones to fix our hormones. And we have our minor hormones, which sadly are our reproductive hormones. And then we have the major hormones, which are cortisol, insulin, and oxytocin. Through this time, I shared with you before we started, come 2014, 2015, I stopped my medical practice to devote time now as a single mom post-divorce to take care of my kids, was in near bankruptcy, making some pretty poor decision making. And I shared when I was on stage, before you spoke at Futures of Health, I shared, remember that time I was engaged? I was making some poor decision making. And so that can include our relationships, right? And my children post-divorce, one in elementary, one in middle, and one in high school, our relationships were really struggling. All girls, mama-daughter battles certainly going on, but there was more to it. There's a physiology to that. And as I was in this state, the brain fog, the memory loss, the agitation, if that wasn't enough, I hit 48 and 5, 10, 20 pounds crept up again, despite not doing anything different. When I heard that from so many patients, and early on in my medical career, I'd be like, really? You're not doing anything different? Surely you're doing something different, right? Like an extra candy bar, not exercising as much, more sedentary. Oh, legit, I was not doing anything different. And I had been over 240 pounds at one time, lost 80, 90 pounds and kept it off for nearly a decade. And these pounds started creeping back up. With that, I thought, oh my gosh, when will this weight gain stop, right? Because if you've been heavy and lost the weight and then all of a sudden you start gaining the weight again, you're like, oh my God, when will it ever stop? So I had that fear. And that took me into embracing the ketogenic lifestyle. But then, I would get keto crazy is what I call it. And I go into detail in the book. So hence the keto green is my solution to that. The alkalinizers, which include, nutrients, high quality, micronutrient rich, alkalizing vegetables like greens, chard, cauliflower, collards, beef greens, all of those things are really sprouts, are all very, very alkalinizing and low carbohydrate. So incorporating that into my diet, as well as lifestyle factors that improve our physiology, stress management, and those issues. And so that became my keto green approach. But not only that, so going from that stage, near bankruptcy, getting clear, shifting to use ketones for fuel over glucose for my brain, because as we enter this transition stage of menopause, we become less able to use glucose for fuel in the brain because it's an estrogen dependent process. So switching to ketones, at least periodically, really powers up our brain. And so that helped me with clarity, that helped me experience the peace, like biblically it says, the peace that surpasses all understanding. It helped me experience that in a time of turmoil in my life. And I always say to be the ocean, not the waves or the eye of the storm, right? To have that peace, calm center, that healthy foundation where you can respond instead of react. And so that combination of getting keto alkaline or keto green helped me get into that state and thereby make some really good decisions, shift from a state of near bankruptcy to creating products and programs that help me and then help others. So the entrepreneurial side of things, and shift me from that point to a 7-figure business. And in addition, the best part of it, yes, I lost the weight, kept it off, the mental clarity and the sense of peace and ability to manage my emotions or to actually feel more at peace on a regular basis, manifesting the healthiest relationships of my life now with my daughter, with my employees, with, my friends and special relationships in my life. So manifesting the healthiest relationships in my life. And one of my clients who I taught this approach to, she said, not only do I like my family better, but they like me better too. And I completely get that.
Dr. Stephanie Estima, welcome back to the Anthropology Podcast.
I am just tickled to be here, Megan.
Your whole world is exploding now. You've got an amazing podcast. You've got an awesome book coming out. Give us the recap on the life of Dr. Stephanie Estima over the last year and a half.
Yeah, so it's been, there's been quite a few changes. So last time I was on this podcast, we were talking about keto. I was in the process at that time, sort of perfecting my, protocols, which are in the book that I am releasing. So we can certainly get to that today. But we were talking about keto and how it's not the same for women. And that really was born out of patterns that I both saw in myself and in the patients that I was counseling, doing some nutrition counseling for. So in April 2019, and I don't recall if that was before or after we spoke. I have to go back and look, but I decided to close down my brick and mortar practice. It was something I've talked to you about this offline. I was talking to you about this offline for, I think, years before I actually did it, but just my frustration. I mean, let me qualify this and say I ran my dream practice. So it was a lot of brain, like a lot of functional neurology, a lot of brain health, a lot of brain metabolism, proxies to help up-level brain health. That's where I love to geek out. I know you love that as well. And it was just this like niggling feeling that just became so loud. I could not continue to ignore it. And it was just that I wanted to be getting this message out to women in a bigger capacity. And the clinic, it was like the easy ticket, right? I had built it up. It was very, steady, predictable income, but I still had this sort of like pounding in the background. It eventually became a pounding and then a scream where I could no longer ignore it. For me to close the brick and mortar and then move into the online space to help reach a larger audience around some of my body of work. So since April 2019, I took a little bit of time off. After that, I had to grieve a little bit that I was no longer in physical practice. And that was, I'm sure you run into this a lot with doctors who transition because it's part of your identity, right? And I just
wrote that down. Yeah.
Yeah. It's, you go to professionals. I mean, first you do like your 4 years in university and then you do your professional degree. And then, in my case, I never stopped taking classes. So you've just been always, mastering your craft and your technique and the art of diagnosis. And can I learn another chiropractic technique? And let me learn a little bit about brain health here. And it was this constant addition to who I was as a doctor. So there was a time afterwards, I'd probably say maybe 4 or 5 months where I was just grieving. Like I was just taking time off, taking it easy, sleeping in a little bit, crying a lot, trying to figure out what I was going to do. There was a lot of crying. And then I decided, late, like maybe the third quarter, towards the end of September in 2019 to start a podcast. This is something I had always wanted to do. It's something I had just put on the back burner because there was no bandwidth for me to do it being in physical practice. So I said, okay, well, let me do one of my dreams. Let's start the podcast, and still going strong. Absolutely loving it. And And then I want to say around the same time, I was like, okay, I'm starting a podcast. And I also know that I need to download. I have a couple of books sort of knocking around like marbles inside my head. So let me get one of them out. And then that's been, about a 1.5 year process. And now I'm just ready. I'm ready to birth my book, baby. I'm ready. She's ready to come out.
Sometimes when people have gone through trauma and been able to come out the other side and then, evangelize and create product around it, it's like, okay, great. Well, that maybe worked for you. But what I really love about this approach is that not only did you go, okay, here was my journey and here's what worked for me. You layered that with, and I happened to have already been an expert in obstetrics and gynecology and women's health and women's hormones. So we layered a whole new level of medical experience on it and credibility and scientific validity to it. And I think it's sort of the trifecta of the coming together of those experiences that make your solution and your system. I know with keto, everyone hears this word, and I really want to unpack your keto green system, because I feel as though people they hear keto and they hear menopause and they hear, some weight stuff. Everyone's going to hear their particular pain points. And then they're just going to go Google a ketogenic diet and be like, that didn't work. Just like everything else I tried didn't work. What are the key foundational pieces that women need to have in place, not just in menopause, but frankly, from a hormone balancing perspective as they are moving through life? And then let's layer some of the keto principles that you talked about on top of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it all starts with a good foundation. And so when I build out my programs, it's more than what we eat. But I also want to emphasize, and just put emphasis on the fact that I was a hormone expert, right? Mm-hmm. And I was still struggling. So, and if I was struggling, how many other people are struggling, thinking, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with my body? And it's, there's a physiological component to it. And then when we gain control of that, everything falls into place. It really, really does. And I emphasize that because, physiology drives our behavior. So when we're, especially in this transition, this empowering transition process of perimenopause and menopause, especially when we're in this transition, that we can powerfully use behaviors to control our physiology and empower physiology to improve our behaviors. So they're combined.
Can I just ask one question before we jump into it? Because, and I mean this with total respect for what Western medicine has to offer, because they have good things to offer, but where are they missing the boat on this hormone piece? Because, I feel as though there has been no further sophistication in thinking other than, your premenopausal will just stick you on the pill and your postmenopausal will put you on hormone replacement therapy. And this whole endocrine thing, it's really not that complicated. So, why are we still missing the boat in that in the traditional system?
I really believe it's a function of industry, honestly, Meghan, because it's the patentable approach to things is one drug, one action, right? And we can't patent natural compounds unless we're patenting delivery or composition or process and things like that, right? And I think that's a problem. I also believe that while the intention may be good, for much of course, it's good for physicians going into medical practice, sacrificing their most, vital years of our life to this higher level of learning and to serve others. I mean, we want to help people, right? But the tools we're given often only serve as Band-Aids or reactionary. And the other part is it's a dual approach, right? Because as individuals, we need to be empowered to take care of our own health. We need to be empowered versus relying on the powerful system and the insurance system. This is what's recommended. I pay this insurance. This is what it provides. And I think it's a dual problem. It's a problem with the insurance companies. It's a problem with ideas that, someone else is responsible for your health. We ultimately are responsible for your health. And that's when I teach in my book, I talk about this in my book, The Hormone Fix, because we have to take that responsibility. And I say, don't give me the control over your health. Don't even give it to me. And I'm pretty awesome. No,
you are.
Yes. Don't even give it to me. you take the control of your own health, because you have to discern what's working for you and what's not.
Women are not mini men. And that's how we are traditionally treated in this dialogue around keto, this dialogue around intermittent fasting. It's really frustrating when you try to take that information or you buy those books and you're like, I'm going to do this. And then suddenly you're in a state of, oh my gosh, like what has just happened to my hormones? I thought this was supposed to make me feel better. And this is actually making me feel worse. And so the resources out there for women are not plentiful. And the conversations by men are always like, they're non-inclusive. Can you give us an overview on what you are referring to when you're talking about the Betty body, which is the name of your book and a huge part of your process? What are we stepping into when we open the pages later today?
I thought long and hard about the title. So as you know, whenever you write content, there's a birthing process that happens there. And then once the content was finished, I was like, okay, how am I going to sort of wrap this up in a bow? And the easy and most obvious choice was to name it the Betty Body. And I'll give you a little bit of backstory in terms of how that name came to be. So I have my podcast, as I mentioned, the name of the podcast is called Better. So Better with Dr. Stephanie. It's not about being perfect. It's just like, what can we do tomorrow, or what can we do today to get better tomorrow? That's sort of the whole through line of the show. And so we started calling the fans of Better our Bettys. So the little, this very similar sounding Better Bettys. And it really just was very sticky. So women started calling themselves Bettys. Like, I'm a Betty, you're the Queen Bee, you're the Queen Betty, and I'm going to be just like you, and I want to be a Betty. And so we would see these reviews come in on the podcast saying, oh my gosh, I'm such a Betty. I'm so happy to be a Betty. And my partner, who you know very well, Giovanni, looked up the definition of Betty in the Urban Dictionary. Now, the Urban Dictionary is not PubMed, right? However, it does have some authority, has some street cred. And in the definition, it was honestly my perfect avatar of a woman. It was, and I'm paraphrasing here, I don't have the exact definition in front of me, but it was something like, a Betty is a triple threat. She's somebody who is smart and loving and quirky and beautiful on the inside as well as the outside. She's a lifelong learner, all of these wonderful things. And I said, that's it. Like, that's who I am. I aspire to be this Betty. And so do my listeners. So I named the book after my fans and the fans of the podcast. And so the subtitle of the book is A Geeky Goddess's Guide to Intuitive Eating, Balanced Hormones, and Transformative Sex. And in the book, we talk about how to self-actualize. And the premise is that you're already everything that you need. You're already exactly who you need to be. You're already your own dream girl, but it's just a matter of, maybe you've lost yourself along the way, and we're going to give you some tools. We give you many, many tools over the 13 chapters that you can sort of pick and choose to get yourself back to where you want to be on the road to self-actualization.
What does this whole process have to do with keto?
Well, I love playing around with different nutritional mediums for affecting change. And I am someone who has played with keto now, have been in and out of keto for many, many years. And I think that it is one of the most powerful tools when it is done correctly. And specifically, if you are a female, when you do it when you are honoring your own biology and your physiology, it can be one of the most powerful tools for up-leveling your brain, your focus, a lot of women who tend to follow me are somewhere in the, 40 to 55-year-old sort of age range. And one of the big comments that I get is, I'm not sleeping well. I have brain fog. I feel inflamed and I feel hot. I feel like my hormones are a mess. So a ketogenic diet, when it's done properly for a female's body, can be a very effective tool to help rid some of these sources of chronic low-grade inflammation, because that's what brain fog is. It's chronic low-grade inflammation. And even though inflammation is sort of like an umbrella term, it's kind of like pain. Like, what do you mean pain? Like, is it sharp? Is it shooting? Is it deep? Is it, there's a lot of different qualifiers for what inflammation is, but using nutrition as a proxy for healing some of these metabolic derangements can be incredibly powerful to help facilitate energy in a woman, to help her lose weight if that's a goal of hers, to help with her brain function, as I mentioned, and to help with her longevity, right? We know that consumption of carbohydrates, especially high consumption of processed carbohydrates, is associated with all-cause mortality, meaning that all sources of, the big ones that we're talking about, the cardiovascular, the cerebrovascular, the stroke, the cancer, the excess carbohydrates is associated with all of these big killers. So when we can begin to approximate and have a carbohydrate appropriate diet, which is through, the process that I talk about in the book is sort of two phases. The first is there's a nutritional intervention. So we have like a therapeutic time where you are staying in ketosis. But then as a woman, you shouldn't stay there. So that's one of the things that I think really delineate myself from other people in the keto space, where it's like, no, a lot of people say this is how our ancestors ate and you have to be in ketosis all the time. And, that's absolutely not true for a woman. We know that as women, we are much more defensive of our fat stores. We actually need a little bit of extra padding, particularly when we're in our menstrual or our reproductive years, to be able to effectively bring about a menstrual cycle every month or so. So there's different tools and tricks that we go through in the book in terms of cycling in and out of ketosis to still be able to get some of that metabolic adaptability and flexibility. But then we also focus on other things that are really important for women, like lean muscle mass and dense bones and things like that. So we talk about different nutritional or macronutrient compositions, like cycling protein up and down to help facilitate that as well.
To me, this notion of intuitive eating is not, I intuitively want a bag of potato chips, or I intuitively want to self-indulge, which is where I feel like sometimes we give ourselves permission to go. But I almost feel like what you're talking about is a cellular intuition, that we have this blueprint that is waiting for us to self-actualize upon in terms of the nutrition that we engage in and the way that we engage in. How do you view this connection between, what you just described, keto as a tool, and this overarching term of intuitive eating that you discuss in the book?
Well, I think that, as to your point, I think that a lot of times people will say, oh, I want to, sit down and have a bag of potato chips. And that's really me engaging in self-care. And we don't, when we think, and
when you say that, it sounds so...
It sounds ridiculous.
Yeah,
because,
it sounds ridiculous.
But our bodies don't want that. Our bodies, and I know that you as a naturopathic doctor also hold this premise that, and chiropractors and naturopaths were sort of sisters in this way, that your body has this natural desire to want to achieve homeostasis, balance, and health. And that the more that you can give yourself those tools, the more that your body is going to express health. When we often think about sitting on the couch at the end of the day, that's how we relax. Well, that's actually not very relaxing for the body, because what you're doing is just sitting in a state of flexion, which is very likely what you've done all day long. You've likely been at your desk, or you've driven to work, or you've gotten the kids, or you've been sitting a lot. What your body craves is low grade movement in extension. So that might be a walk. That might be, maybe doing some light weights where you're working your back, or you're doing any variety of light movement. That's actually how we hack into our parasympathetic nervous system, which is to say, when you're engaging in self-care, we do these things that are going to activate centers in our brain, like the motor cortex, which is in the front part of our brain, that is going to now inhibit some of the lower brain centers that are involved in our sympathetics and our stress response. What we define as intuitive, like you were saying, to sit and have, some cookies or chips or crackers. I think when you begin to attune to the language of your body, whether that is through symptoms and accepting those symptoms for what they are, but then having a lens to try and ameliorate them, Or it's knowing that you are worthy, that your body and your cells are worthy of nourishing food. I think that that's when we move into what truly is intuitive eating. And that is to say, learning to appropriately respond to your body in a way that your cells require of you and they expect of you. Your body does not expect you to eat potato chips. And I know that that might sound harsh, and I hope that this is not, coming across as tough love, but your body wants to be healthy. And you know that chips are not, sometimes it's warranted. Listen, I'm homeschooling my kids right now. Tonight we're ordering pizza. I'm tired of cooking. There is every Friday night we have a little, we loosen up the belt. For the most part, it's that 80-20 rule, right? It's what you are doing most of the time that is going to render the biggest results. So do you have to be perfect all the time? Absolutely not. I completely reject the idea of perfection anyway. I think it's a patriarchal, sexist construct. But I think that as long as you are committing to progress, you are committing to the idea that you are worthy of eating well, then you will begin to make smaller, minute changes in your eating patterns that over the long term amalgamate into these momentous, very large changes in your metabolism, in your body composition, in your energy, in your mood, in all the things that most people are concerned about.
So if step one is take control of your health and take responsibility for your health, what are some of the other foundational pieces that you have found to be so critical? And I'm assuming these all work synergistically. It's not like you can pick and choose. You got to have these things in check. Yeah,
absolutely. And one of the programs I teach online, my Magic Menopause program, I go through, I said, it's not just about what we eat. It's about 25% of what we eat, 75% of these greater things. So number 2 is to recognize that there's a lifestyle component. In order to be well, we have to think well, move well, sleep well, eat well, and relate well to be well. So there's a combination of things in addition to eat well. There's a multifactorial effect. And so for me in starting my clients, one of the things that I would have clients do is they come into the office with a myriad of symptoms, right? Anxiety, PMS, the symptom of hating your husband, but it's only 2 weeks out of the month. It's typically your hormones and not your husband, right? Not to mention the irregular cycle. So when a client would come to my office, the second step would be to detox them. I take an inventory questionnaire, just like the ones in my book, start a 21-day detox. And now I call it my keto green detox. So it would be eliminating the inflammatory foods, making foods, encouraging foods that are alkalinizing, low carbohydrate and alkalinizing, and really more about less of what we're doing and staying true to the whole foods. Basically, if you can pick it, peel it, fish it, hunt it, milk it, grow it, then for the most part, you can eat it, staying with real food. So I would have them do that when I draw the blood work. Send them home. Maybe I'm adding on some of my Mighty Maca Plus, additional detoxification support to help their body remove toxins during this time period. And when clients would come back, they would say, I'm already 90% better, 90% better. And then I would tweak with maybe some bioidentical progesterone, especially over age 40, as we enter this neuroendocrine vulnerability. And I want to fine tune, I want to tank up the progesterone because it's neuroprotective and it's a precursor to our sex hormones. So sometimes adding a little transdermal progesterone here can be beneficial if we need to. And so just with those 2 interventions, detoxification, getting rid of sugar, inflammatory foods, processed foods, artificial flavorings, sweeteners, preservatives, all of those things can make a big difference. And in my keto green way, it's like I said, not just about what we eat, but when we eat is a part of that too. So the third step would be extending intermittent fasting from 13 to 16 hours between dinner and breakfast. So we want to give our body time to get nice low levels of glucose, really good fasting levels of glucose, and become more insulin sensitive and work to get our body into ketosis, to start using reserved fat for fuel versus in the keto lifestyle, it's often we're using the fat in our diet. We want to tap into our own fat reserves for the most part. Most of us have a few extra, to get rid of. I have some well stored. So tapping into our fat for fuel to use that for to get ketones, because glucose is a fuel source, but glucose is to gasoline as ketones are to jet fuel.
Once you start to realize that our society is very much based for what are more male constructs, we can begin then to say, okay, so how do I fit into this picture? What are my rhythms and rituals, and what's my cadence, and what does my cycle look like? And for women, we go through our entire hormonal milieu over the course of about a month, whereas men will cycle through it daily, right? So once we, even just that piece, if that's the only thing that you take away from this conversation, you're already ahead. You're already miles ahead of other women who are trying to fit into this patriarchal, more male-based system. And I will just say as well, I love men. Okay. So I always want to pre-frame this. I love men. There's nothing, I love my man. I have 2 sons, so I love men. But what I think has been lost is this beautiful hormone, this ever-changing ebb and flow of the female hormonal landscape has been lost. And women are not aware of why they feel different at certain times of the month. And they try to put their head down and punch through it. And this is where we run into problems. So in the book, I basically go through how to set up a morning routine, which is, and potentially a little bit of, controversial. It's a little, controversial in that I start off the chapter by saying, I think most morning routines are sexist. It's like, there's all these morning routines where men get up at some ungodly hour. It's like 4:00 in the morning or something. And they're journaling for an hour. And then they have this beautiful tea ceremony that they have. And then they work out for an hour and then they take a cold shower. And then it's like, okay, where are the kids? Like, as a woman, we are often the primary caregivers. And if that man has children, it's very likely that his wife or potentially help is raising those kids. And if that's something that he can afford or that's afforded to him, like, bless you, right? Like, all the more power to you. But as a woman, I don't want a woman who is now the primary caregiver of her children to be like, why can't I wake up at 4 a.m? First, women have longer sleep cycles, so you shouldn't be waking up that early. But also, sometimes when my kids were young, and I don't know if this is true for you, Doc, or not, but my morning routine was sometimes like my kids coming into my bedroom and waking me up. Like, that was my morning routine,
There was no potential for a morning routine for a very long time.
Yeah.
And once I let go of it, it was this massive relief. I was like, okay, I'll start it once Raylan sleeps through the night. And then I'll start it once Bela sleeps through the night. I've been at this for 10 years now. And, now we're at a point where 80% of the time they'll sleep through the night. And those 20%, there is no morning routine that happens. And that is the permission I've given myself. I was like, sleep is the number one priority.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
When it gets disrupted. And so I go to plan H of the morning routine based on what happened the night before.
Yes. And that flexibility of thinking is so healthy, because what women typically do is they say, well, there must be something wrong with me. Like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I do this morning routine that, whoever is touting? And if you actually look in the morning routine genre, it tends to be men. It tends to be males who are saying, wake up 2 hours early or 3 hours early before everyone wakes up. And for men, that's really great, right? It's really great for their energy, for their growth hormone, testosterone levels. It's supporting that. But for women, we can't, it's just an impossibility. So I love this idea of flexibility in your morning routine. So as you just mentioned, sometimes I have a 5-minute morning routine. Like, sometimes I'm just dancing to a song. And other times the kids, and I go downstairs. I have a little home gym that I work out of, and we'll do, they'll jump on the trampoline for a little bit, and I'll try to punch out some weights. And other times it's nothing at all. Right. So I think that getting rid of some of the shame and guilt that we have as women that we carry because we can't act exactly like men, or the things that men can do, I think is really important.
What are some of the tenets of the keto green way in terms of how women can expect to experience their diet if they're doing this? You mentioned the intermittent fasting, but what are some of the other elements?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like you touched on the key difference between the process, even the order of the way we do things, how that can make a really big difference. So for me, the keto green way starts with getting alkaline first. And I have clients check their urine pH. And I tell you why. It is another vital sign. Just like the weight on our scale, our blood pressure, our pulse, our temperature is our vital signs. the urine pH is a vital sign. It tells us how well are we doing, because it tells us more than about how are we getting enough healthy nutrients. Men had vegetarians acidic with their urine pH, and they're like, why am I? Well, how's your stress level? Are you in a toxic environment or toxic relationship? Cortisol, increases in cortisol, PTSD can increase, absolutely decreases our urine pH, makes it more acidic. So increases our acidity. And that's a key realization, because then we're robbing Peter to pay Paul, right? We're going to take nutrients from our bones, muscle, nervous system, right? To use these nutrients for maintaining our blood pH, which has to be maintained very, very specifically. And we don't measure blood pH because it's pretty well maintained. Unless we're severely ill, is that going to fluctuate significantly? But our urine pH is a barometer. It is measuring, okay, how are we doing today? And I first recognized this when I was going into ketosis and I was having those keto crazy symptoms. I would check my urine pH. I'm like, I'm acidic. Well, in functional medicine, I call it functional gynecology, that alkaline urine pH really helps with, gives us the power of healthy detoxification, helps with hormone balance, and just recognize that, it feels better when we have an alkaline urine pH. And so certainly the diet helps, but the mornings I would walk on the beach, barefoot, walk on the beach, I would be alkaline all day. And I was like, doing the same things, eating the same things, but the walk on the beach, now I know, drove down my cortisol level. So I had a healthier physiology to start the day with, versus the mornings I woke up, maybe had a keto coffee and was stressed because I had to run 3 kids to 3 different schools, right? So
I know that
acidic all day. Yes. Acidic all day. So, utilizing that made a difference. And another, so first thing is get alkaline urine pH, is really work on the alkalinizers in your food choices, low carbohydrate alkalinizers. So those greens and sprouts and healthy food choices, as well as the lifestyle, meditation, yoga, what gives you pleasure, go a walk on a beach, having laughter with a friend, having sex with your partner. Those things are alkalinizing activities. Oxytocin is a powerful alkalinizer. So that hormone of love, bonding, and connection. So that would be the first thing, is get an alkaline pH. And then the second is work on intermittent fasting and dropping down those carbs to get keto. So healthy fats, we need fats for fuel, and fats to decrease our appetite and decrease our cravings. So avocado, olive oil, Mediterranean style food choices, if you think of it that way, avocado, salmon, healthy meat from grass-fed cows, and nuts and seeds, and really micronutrient dense nutrients. And once we add in these healthy fats and good quality protein, our body's not having those cravings. And if we keep carbohydrates nice and low, we're not going to have those hypoglycemic effects that people say, well, I can't get into ketosis because I get hypoglycemia. 100% have kicked that in 100% of my patients that had that complaint. So because our blood sugar is not dipping way back down after a carbohydrate meal, we're not going to get hypoglycemia. We create glycemic stability, which I've monitored with 24-hour blood sugar monitors. And so that's a huge thing. So start with getting an alkaline urine pH, adding in the alkalinizers, get alkaline first. Second, intermittent fasting, work on getting into ketosis through healthy choices. And that intermittent fasting and stopping snacking is critical for women. We are more designed in the menopause and postmenopause to live this keto green way. We really are. The healthy centenarians, the healthy 80-year-olds, 90-year-olds that I know had limited their own eating styles to a very similar way. Small meal at dinner, hence the senior specials.
Totally.
Have you ever seen that? Yeah. Small early dinner, eat before 7 p.m. That intuitively created a healthier physiology, right? So these lifestyle characteristics that have been developed over time on an individual level or over centuries on a cultural level to increase the longevity of a society, a healthy longevity, right? Living in a nursing home the last 20 years of our life is not a healthy longevity. And that's all of this, mental and neurologic degeneration from, honestly, poor fuel choice, right? We're using glucose instead of ketones. We switch that and we optimize that. And then a key point that I want to mention is, I alluded to it, like the alkalizing behaviors, is I start each morning with appreciation, prayer, and meditation. And that changes my outlook for the day. I have a better day when I do that consistently. And so do my patients. Creating a morning ritual sets us up for success.
We have a series of rapid fire questions. We call these KPIs, so key performance indicators. Just like we have them in our business, I believe we also have them in how we live our own lives. So indulge me. I've got a few things coming your way. First question: who is inspiring you right now?
Man, I would have to say JJ Virgin, our mutual friend, right? Because she stays true and authentic to her mission, her goal, and quality of life that serves her and serves community. She's the rising tide that floats all boats. And she is inspiring me. Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. She really, she walks the talk and she leads by example. Great choice. What are you reading right now?
I am reading The Tattooist of Auschwitz.
Right
now. That was referred to me. Yeah, powerful.
What is the one thing you're most consistent with respect to your health?
I am most consistent with alkalinizers, with getting greens in my system. Like, that's a component. I'm like, my plate every day, every meal has to have something that's alkalinizing, balancing on it as a regular, because I know how damaging stress, cortisol, and trauma is to my physiology, and I have to constantly counteract it. And then it just creates, it does create a fullness, more, I think I'll call it a higher connection with nature as I do that.
What is something totally badass about you that people would not otherwise know?
Oh man, I am a boxer.
Oh yeah, you are. I love that.
I am. It's one of the best workouts. I started doing it in Melbourne, Australia, in 2007. And it was a meditation for me. It's the only activity, like just hitting the mitts with another person, not necessarily being hit, but hitting mitts, or mitt work, it's called, or bag work, is the time that my brain empties, and it became a meditation. So, and it makes great shoulders for those off the shoulder blouses we love.
It's brilliant. Multifaceted. What do you do for fun or play?
For fun and play, really, it's cooking in the kitchen with my kids. I love that. I absolutely love that. And then travel whenever we can. So but that cooking in the kitchen, we'll pour a glass of wine, we'll eat. Okay. So my 11-year-old does not get wine typically.
To be clear.
But my older girls do, and we'll talk, cook, chop, or, and just laugh and enjoy that and make a beautiful, loving creation. So when we have the opportunity, we're all together to do that. That just lights me up.
Sounds so lovely. And last question for you, entrepreneurism. Are we born this way, or do we learn to become entrepreneurs?
We are born with a tremendous imagination. The ability to imagine is a natural for entrepreneurship. So I believe that each of us has it in us.
Fantastic. It's my favorite question to ask. Dr. Anna Cabeca, author of The Hormone Fix. It's such a pleasure having you here today. Thanks for being with us. Can you give everybody 3 critical things that they can deploy immediately in their life that is going to start them on this path of heightening their intuition with self and caring for their bodies in a whole new way?
Sure. I think that the very first thing that you can do that's super easy is just download some sort of fertility app and start tracking your cycle if you're not already. And I did not do this for years. Like, full disclosure, I had no idea when my period was coming and going, had no idea how long it was. So I think one of the best things that you can begin to do is just start amalgamating data. So first thing would be to start tracking your cycle. If I may be so bold to suggest that you pick up my book, I think that you will find it.
I was like, be bold, be bold.
It is my book, baby. I'm so proud of it. And I hope that it's going to be, at least in some way, give you one tool that you can derive from it, whether it's cycling plans for cycling your body in and out of ketosis, where it's going full in ketosis, where it's workouts, where it's supplementation rhythms. That would be, my second suggestion. And then the third suggestion would just be to take the opportunity to be gentle with yourself. I think as women, especially type A personalities, of which I am a former recovering type A personality, it is still a daily struggle. But whenever we decide to do something, we want it right now. We want or we're like, okay, I'm going to work out. So I'll work out for a week. So where's my biceps? I don't see them yet. So we have this very short time that we give ourselves. So I would love if, in conjunction with the book and the cycle tracking that you're going to be doing, that you just make it easy. Like you just decide that I'm not going to have these punitive thoughts that are going to beat myself up if I'm not getting the results that I want in a week or 2 weeks or a month or 2 months. As a clinician, as you are, Megan, and what my clinical experience tells me is that when someone does have some sort of hormonal derangement, it takes some time to undo that. You need to be able to give yourself a long runway, a lot of grace and a lot of love and a lot of forgiveness in order to continue to tread along that path. So I would just love if women stop being so hard on themselves and to stop with the punitive thoughts, because it is just, when we think about, what can be damaging in terms of your metabolism, you have a piece of cake and okay, so maybe your insulin spikes and, there's this sort of 2-hour time where your insulin levels are much higher, but then it's kind of done, right? But if you are constantly beating yourself up about things, that is day and night, all day, every day, that is going to bring you into that sympathetic dominance that we touched on before. And you're just going to be a stress case. So I would just love it if women were like, okay, I'm going to do all these things, but I'm just going to make it easy and trust that my body knows what to do. My favorite health hack, I would say that it is probably the most simplest of hacks, but it is, it's my philosophy that health doesn't really need to be hard. So I will counsel anyone if weight loss is a goal for them, or they're just trying to be more mindful and develop that intuitive muscle, to put their fork down in between bites. And I know that that's super, people are probably like, okay, whatever. But I promise you, you're giving yourself the space to fully chew your food, first of all, which is really important for the amylase and the digestive capacity of your body. But you're also giving your hunger signals, some of these metabolic signals, to signal whether or not you are full when you are eating slower, instead of just barreling everything into your mouth in 5 minutes or less. So putting the fork down in between bites is probably my favorite health hack of all time.
How would you define your purpose?
Oh, this is a really good one. My purpose, I feel, and I know that my purpose is to speak to women in a way that they probably haven't been spoken to before, and to help facilitate what I think is just very overdue, which is healing our feminine. And we talked a little bit about masculine energy before, and this is not gender specific, right? So this is like masculine energy and our feminine energy. And I think that for most of us, male, female, and everything in between, I think that we have really divorced ourselves from, suppressed and ignored the intuition, the surrender, the slowing down, and the softness that our feminine energy can provide. So it is not only a personal goal of mine to continue to heal that wounded feminine in my own, heart and soul, but to also teach other women and anybody else who wants to come along for the ride how to do it as well.
I love it. Well, congratulations on the book, and thank you again for hanging out with me today. Impact is what lives on when we leave the room, tuck them in, or step off stage. It is less about what you do, more about how you make them feel, and everything about how you choose to show up in the world. If you enjoyed this podcast, hit subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you are listening to this episode. I am your host, Meghan Walker. Until next